Hey there, Mr. Redder here. Welcome back to another episode of Reddit Podcast Stories. Our first story we'll be reading today. Parents told my brother that he could take my house and I could just live in the camper in the backyard. After that, am I the jerk for missing an actual emergency because I turned my phone off to avoid my wife's unnecessary contact attempts? And after that, am I the jerk for forbidding my sister to meet my kid and telling my wife to butt out of the situation? Now for every thumbs up this video gets, one Karen does not get to take anyone's house. I sure can't afford to buy one. Have you seen the prices of real estate these days? So please smash that like button and subscribe and turn on notifications for new stories from Reddit every single day. Parents told my brother that he could take my house and I could just live in the camper in the backyard. I'm a single man in my early 30s. I've got a brother who's 29 and he's already got 4 kids now. He had his first at 22 and his second followed a year later, then the third 2 years after that, and the fourth is the most recently born a couple months ago. His wife, my sister-in-law, and I do not get along, as she always likes to try and get a rise out of me by acting superior, then turns into an extreme self-victimizing drama queen if I retaliate against her in any way. She can cry in an instant and can put on an extremely convincing show to get sympathy from just about anyone. My parents and brother absolutely adore her, even though they know exactly how she really is and just don't care. She's very good looking, I'll give her that, but she's so awful that I could never be attracted to her. She also refuses to get any sort of job, even though she has a college degree, and my mother willingly helps with the kids all day. So their finances are entirely dependent on my brother. This also means they can't afford to live anywhere but my parents' house. And privacy is a bit of an issue with all of them under one roof in a 3-bedroom house that was built in the 60s. Growing up, my younger brother was also the obvious favorite. We're 3 years apart in age, but he developed a superiority complex because I was badly punished if I retaliated against his antics in any way. It was obvious my parents cared for him a lot more because he got the lion's share of everything unless people called them out on it, which did happen a fair bit by other members of family. Which is why my parents packed us all up and moved us about 150 miles away from them, so they generally would only see us on holidays since it was a 3-hour drive. My parents mistreated me on a number of occasions, flirted relentlessly with my first girlfriend to the point that she broke up with me and laughed at any misfortune I had, and my parents just told me to suck it up whenever I was upset about it. I only got equal treatment when my parents wanted to keep up appearances. I admit it was rather funny to see the looks on their faces whenever they had to treat me equal to my brother on birthdays and Christmas because other people were present. We had relatives that were very nosy and loved gossiping drama, so my parents did their best to hide what was really going on and threatened to take all my stuff away if I didn't keep my mouth shut. If anything, it just made my parents celebrate more when I turned 18 and moved out, because it meant they no longer had to provide for me. I wasn't even done with high school yet when I moved out. But couch surfing was far better than living with them. I was low contact ever since leaving home. They didn't even show up for my high school graduation, but I really don't care. From that point on, I would usually only see my parents and my brother on holidays, like the rest of the family. The start of 2020 lockdown was not kind to me. I lost my job and couldn't renew the lease on my condo because my roommate also lost his job, and neither of us could really afford the place on unemployment money. It was a rented 2-bedroom condo that I really loved. As the lease was ending, my roommate left early to move back in with relatives, and I had to sell nearly all of my stuff because I was soon going to be homeless if I didn't downsize to an extreme. I really shouldn't have rented a place that was so expensive, but I liked living the high life, until that life wasn't kind to me, and I realized I should have been living somewhere far cheaper so I could have saved more money to fall back on. But I had a plan. I own a truck simply for the fact that I've always loved trucks, so I found a $1,000 camper in good shape and put it on my truck just so I could live out of it for a while. It was supposed to be temporary, but I ended up living out of it far longer than I ever thought. I originally was hoping to be able to live out of the camper at my parents' house, where my brother and his family still reside as well. But when I asked my parents to let me stay for a while, they told me they had a full house and didn't want me there. Plus, we hadn't exactly gotten along in the past decade. They said they'd only agree to let me park my camper there if I paid them basically what it would cost to rent an apartment in my area. That was way too much just to park my camper. I was jobless and trying to save as much of my unemployment money as I could until I found a new job. I may as well be living in an apartment with the rent price they were asking. My parents called my camper an eyesore and told me to take a hike since we couldn't come to an agreement. And sister-in-law thought it was absolutely hilarious I had to live in a camper. My brother joined her in pointing at and mocking me while calling me a homeless bum. I parked my truck and camper in a store parking lot to sleep on the first night that I had nowhere else to go. I felt scared out of my mind that someone might try to break in. Suffice to say, I didn't sleep well that night. There was nowhere else I could go, as any other relatives that owned houses were fairly far away, and all of my friends were all apartment people. And I was pretty attached to my area as well, so I didn't want to just leave. I'd also had my mail forwarded to a friend's apartment. It was the only way I could still get my mail anymore. Finding a stable place to park was pretty difficult. I went looking around to try and find a job similar to my old one. It took months of living the nomadic camper life. In that time, I had to deal with a lot. Everything from beggars and addicts to people demanding I leave because my camper was an eyesore. At one point, someone who told me to move claimed to be with an HOA. I wasn't even parked on a street with houses. And when I questioned, "What HOA?" they got incredibly belligerent and threatened me. I moved my camper anyway just to avoid the trouble. In order to have a steady supply of electricity, I learned to use a long extension cord to plug it in anywhere I could to recharge my camper batteries. This meant sneaking around and plugging it into an outside outlet of a random building while parked on a street. I know that's a crummy thing to do, but I had to keep my batteries charged so my refrigerator would stay cold. I had a small solar power bank for recharging my phone, but I didn't have anything like a generator, and generators are noisy and require fuel anyway, so I did what I had to do. After months of living like that, I finally managed to get a new job. I had to move to the neighboring city to find a job that didn't involve retail. I worked retail while in college and promised myself never again, though I was nearly ready to break that promise. I was still getting unemployment money, but I had no stable place to live while receiving it, and I didn't want to still be jobless when it ran out. Plus, I was bored out of my mind. I had little else to do but read, watch movies on a small portable DVD player, use my phone or laptop, and keep note of where I could park and what local public bathrooms I could use. I kind of envy that the Japanese have public bathhouses. We could really use stuff like that over here. When I finally landed a new job, I practically lived in the back lot of the building by the warehouse in old employee parking spaces that literally no one else seemed to bother using because they were so far in the back that the area was borderline forgotten. My boss and company owner actually liked this arrangement because I was willingly available to take any shift I could get, so long as I had enough sleep. He even let me take the camper off my truck and set it up in one of the spaces so I could drive around without it. Not exactly sure if this was legal, but no one bothered us about it. The entire time I lived back there, I didn't have to deal with many trespassers. There were a few, but the security guards escorted them out. I was pretty much on call almost all the time when they needed me and was working virtually every day of the week. My boss let me plug my camper into the building for power and water, and I paid a small amount of rent by working for free on Sundays when no one else was in the office but the janitor and security guard. Beyond that, I usually had to shower at a friend's apartment or at my local gym, as the camper didn't have a shower in it and only a portable toilet. And I didn't want to fill it because emptying it is a nasty chore, so I used other bathrooms as often as I could. I had a key to the warehouse and could go in to use the bathroom there at any hour. I was even on a first-name basis with the night security guard. He's since become one of my closest friends. The camper was easy to heat in the winter with a small electric heater. Summers were not fun though. The camper didn't have AC, so I had to get a used portable air conditioner just to make it bearable. I made a lot of overtime pay and hands-on learned some new skills from other employees. Eventually, midway into this year, I landed a better position in the company as a supervisor and started making a better salary than my old job. That's when I decided I wanted a house. The scare I'd gotten from losing my condo made me realize I needed something much more stable for the long term. I looked around for something close to my work and just 2 miles away found a 3-bedroom manufactured home on a small property, but I managed to get it for $10,000 less than the asking price somehow. I used nearly my entire savings for a down payment and got approved for a home loan. I finally didn't have to live in a camper anymore. There was enough space for me to back my truck in behind the house to take the camper off of it to set it up in the backyard. So I put it there as its own little building just in case I want to use it again. When I was fully settled in the house, I was dumb enough to brag about it on the Book of Faces. My family saw the post, and that's where this crap really starts. After a few weeks, my parents and brother, along with his family, come to visit completely unannounced to have a tour of my home. I didn't even give them my address, so how they found out where I live, I still don't know. None of my friends have fessed up, and no prior family members visited me before that, so I wonder if they stalked me at work and followed me home or something. It really wouldn't surprise me. Once I opened the door, they practically all shoved their way in like rambunctious tourists. Then they just started making themselves at home. They all kept poking around, and sister-in-law had this creepy smirk that she was repeatedly showing me. And it was only later that I figured out why, and it made me madder than a bull that just got stung by a hornet. My parents were constantly talking about how I've got so much extra space now, and it's too much for someone like me who has no wife or kids. Sure, not now, but maybe someday. And my brother kept remarking about how there was more space here than at our parents' house, and how my house was closer to his job too. Red flags all around, I know. Eventually, my brother asked me to speak privately. Everyone else suddenly left the room and piled out onto the front porch. That's what finally made me realize they had planned something. My brother, let's call him Dan for the sake of simplicity, said the house was too much for me alone, and I should let him move in with his family because his wife is pregnant with kid number 4, and my house is much closer to his job. He pointed out that I already have the camper, so I could just live in that outside while they live in the main house. And I'd like to point out that Dan never once spoke of offering rent. Mind you, he's got a good job. He also started talking about how there would be changes and even curfews, and that I couldn't just walk in at any time without prior notice. If it weren't my brother, I'd think the person I was talking to had lost their mind. But Dan lost his marbles long ago, thanks to our parents treating him like he was the center of the world. I tried to speak, but he kept talking over me as if I had no say in the matter. There was no way on earth I'd rent my house or parts of my house to him. Other people, maybe, just so that I can pay the mortgage off more easily, but certainly not him or his nasty wife. I've heard of this exact kind of situation on videos online many times, and never once did I think I'd actually live it because I thought it was so ludicrous. But my parents, brother, and sister-in-law do all fit the bill for a bunch of narcissistic, entitled crazies. So I picked up my phone and set off to start recording, then just held on to it. Dan didn't even seem to care or notice that I'd done this, and just sat there with his arms waving around while talking about all the reasons of why he needed my house. Then went from saying that to acting like it was a done deal and trying to reach out his hand to shake mine. That's when I finally showed my backbone and said, "Oh no," and I said it loud enough that Dan stumbled backwards for a second. I'd rarely ever raised my voice to him on that level because I was punished by our parents whenever I did. But this was my house, not theirs. My spine can be as shiny as it wants here. I stood up and then told him that my house was not up for grabs, and acting like I'll let him move in just because they want it won't make it happen. I bought my house for me, and it's not my fault he keeps having more kids and has to keep living with our parents because he can't afford to move out. Dan got as physically close to me as he could without actually touching me and said that I didn't deserve the house and he needed a better place for his family to live. I laughed back in his face and said that was total BS because I worked hard to be able to buy my house. Of course I deserved it. Dan started yelling that I have no wife or kids and I don't need all the space, so I may as well just give it to him. I said I'm not giving him anything, and he never even offered to pay me rent. If I let him move in, I'd still be covering the entire mortgage on my own house without even being able to live in my own house. Then Dan told me that he shouldn't have to pay rent because his family comes first, and our parents said I was going to do this and that I will. I yelled, as if their word was law or something, and told Dan that they did not have the right or power to give my house to him. Then, right on cue, my parents and sister-in-law barged back in through the front door and surrounded me to try and force me to argue. There was a lot of fighting, but to sum it up, from this point on, I heard the line, "Just do it for Dan," way more times than I can remember. In the fight, I told them all that they don't have a say in my life or my house and to get out before I call the cops. Sister-in-law screamed the loudest at me about how she was pregnant again and I can't do this to her. I said I did nothing to her. She just assumed she could take and take from me like I would allow it. I had no obligation to her or my family. Then I called her a stuck-up jerk who never had any respect for me, so I don't care what she thinks or how many kids she has. I have no sympathy for her. She won't be living in my house. Well, that made her angry enough to attack me. She got in one good hit, but then my brother held her back while she was kicking and screaming. She demanded he let her go so she could get me again. The phone I was holding recorded pretty much everything, so I held it up and said I was going to call the police if they didn't leave right away. My parents told Dan they were leaving. Then my mother said that I had a week to come to my senses. I told her I won't be and to not come back. Then I told sister-in-law that my phone recorded everything, and if she tries anything, I'll press charges for assault. She screamed at me and then stormed out, loudly crying with her face in her hands. My mother was the last one out the door and said that I better do this for Dan and sister-in-law. I responded by telling her I won't be. Am I the jerk for missing an actual emergency because I turned off my phone to avoid my wife's unnecessary contact attempts? My best friend, 31 male, and I, 27 male, have a tradition of taking a yearly weekend trip together that's phone-free. We've been doing this for a decade now. These weekend trips consist of us staying in a suite and exploring the city, not traversing the wilderness, so it's not like we're completely disconnected. Still, we like to keep one on hand for navigation and emergency purposes, and it would usually be friend's phone that we brought along. Friend and I left for our trip this year 2 Fridays ago to make use of the long weekend. This was the first time I've gone on one of these trips since my wife and I moved in together, got engaged, or got married. However, we were dating for the last 2 years worth of trips, 2021 and 2022, and she seemed fine during that time. I would just tell her I was going to be busy for the weekend and she'd leave me alone. I understand that there are different expectations once you get married, but I didn't expect for the 180 in behavior. My wife all but demanded I take my phone as well in case she needed to get a hold of me, despite her having my friend's number. I let her know I had arrived, and immediately after that she was texting me and asking me how things were. Then again asking me another question when I didn't respond to the first one. I eventually muted our text conversation because I was sick of the phone buzzing. She called me a few hours later and asked why I wasn't responding to her texts. I reiterated that this was supposed to be a no-phone weekend and kept the call short despite her trying to drag out the conversation. She called me once more after this. When I answered and found out it wasn't an emergency, I simply turned off my phone. The calls then started coming in from my friend and he followed suit. We spent the rest of the weekend with our phones off until the drive back on Monday. I called my wife and informed her that we were about 30 minutes away from my place and she was furious. She said that there ended up being an emergency. Her sister got into a car accident that won't affect her long term, but still resulted in broken bones, and that I had just ignored her the entire time when she needed me. I told her that I was very sorry to hear about her sister, but it wasn't my fault she had essentially forced my hand into cutting off means of communication. She went to stay with a friend before I arrived home that night and has since come home, but she's still fuming. Am I the jerk? Edit. I'm politely asking everyone to stop making harmful accusations about my friend and the nature of our relationship when we were younger. It's making me uncomfortable, and not in the "I'm having an epiphany" way that you guys are hoping, but in the "you're jumping to incredibly crude conclusions about someone I love and trust based on a tiny snippet into our life." Edit 2. Thank you for the kind messages. I just checked them expecting more anger, but instead I found lots of compassion. I appreciate that so much. Not the jerk. Her sister getting into what sounds like a relatively minor accident is not an emergency. This is beyond ridiculous. How is it different from you being in another country and having no service or something? People are allowed to still live their lives despite being married. You're not tethered to your spouse. Well, who do you think is the jerk? OP or his wife? Please let us know. Am I the jerk for forbidding my sister to meet my kid and telling my wife to butt out of the situation? So I, 28 male, have been married to my wife for 4 years and we have a 2-year-old son together. My older sister, Ariel, has 2 kids with her husband. She's my only sibling, but we do not speak and haven't since my wedding 4 years ago. My wife knew I had no relationship with my sister or mother whenever we got together, but now it's causing an argument. We were a pretty typical family until my mom cheated my senior year of high school with a coworker. My dad moved out immediately and I moved with him. This caused the rift between me and my sister. My sister believed since my mom was sorry and it was a one-time thing, as she claimed, which I don't for a second believe, and was trying to reconcile through the church that me and my dad's refusal to speak with her was somehow wrong. I was 18 and my sister was 20. Long story, but eventually my sister stopped speaking with my dad. I haven't seen my mom since 2016, and we have only spoken once since, in 2019, when she tried to invite herself to my wedding. She was not invited, but my sister was out of courtesy. My sister didn't show up, and we have not spoken since. My wife knew when she married me that my only family was my dad and my cousins. She said it was okay, and she didn't care. So a few months ago, my wife got a call from my sister's husband. I've never met him, and he said that he wanted to start mending the bridge and would like to have me come meet their kids. I said no. Well, then my sister started sending pics of her kids to my wife, and my wife sent pictures back. I told her multiple times I do not like this, and she told me she could send pics to whoever she wants. I said that if she keeps testing my boundaries, she will be a single parent really soon, that she signed up for me as is. My wife is saying it's wrong to deprive my son of his family. I said I don't even have a relationship with my sister or brother-in-law, so why should my kid? That doesn't make me feel comfortable at all, and I don't even know these people. Also, any pic she sends could easily be forwarded to my mom, and she needed to think about that. She said she doesn't even understand why my mom can't meet her kid, and that comment alone ticked me off because I've explained my whole family drama for years, and it feels like she just ignored it. I said she really needs to think about who she wants to appease because I'm not going to stand for disrespect of my boundaries. My dad totally agrees with me and is telling me I should start setting aside money now for an exit strategy because my wife's behavior is exactly how my mom used to act, and I should see the warning signs now. Am I the jerk? This is definitely above Reddit's pay grade. You need to seek out therapy for your parents' divorce and couples counseling for you and your wife. My completely uneducated opinion is that it seems like your father weaponized your emotions against your mother, and he's using those same emotions to drive a wedge between you and your wife. She crossed a line, but your father should stay out of it. You're now issuing relationship-ending ultimatums over a couple of pictures. She's not blameless either. You guys need to seek some help to process this. Going no contact with your mother over her infidelity seems way too harsh. But again, therapy. Well, who do you think is the jerk? OP or his wife? Please let us know. Am I the jerk for telling my sister to remove me from her wedding? My twin sister, a textbook narcissist, is getting married in May 2024. I was supposed to be the maid of honor, but she would constantly hold it over my head, telling me I'm going to be demoted or removed. She asks me for my opinion, and being the person I am, I give her an honest answer, and she always blows up, deflects, and blames everything on me. When she starts yelling, I stop talking and do something else because, well, I don't like getting yelled at and don't want to say something that will just make her yell even more. Today at lunch, we were discussing wedding plans, and I simply asked whether the maid of honor will be wearing a different dress just to get a better idea of her vision. She started yelling, saying I was making everything about me by assuming I was still the maid of honor. We moved on to overnight guests and where they'd sleep. It's a 4-house camp, so there's cabins and fishing areas. My mom said she was going to rent an Airbnb because she didn't want to stay in an unfinished cabin. I made a joke that they could camp in the pop-up tent or their truck because they do that almost every weekend. My sister completely lost it, saying she had had this conversation with her fiancé already and how my mom isn't going to want to do that the night before a wedding. How was I supposed to know they had had this conversation multiple times already? She kept yelling, I shut down, then she went on about how I'm being negative, having an attitude, and she's not going to deal with her maid of honor acting like this at her wedding or bachelorette party, and any other reason she could think to yell at me. I'm not upset or mad at this point, I just want to move on to something else, but now I'm getting yelled at for always starting fights when we talk about wedding planning. She decides it's time to go, so we can head back to her apartment and I can go home. We make it out to the car and sit in the parking lot so she can yell at me for another 10 minutes about the same stuff. I wanted nothing more than to just leave the situation, but my car was 20 minutes away, so I couldn't. We get back to her apartment, I gather my things to leave, and she's still yelling, how I apparently don't care about her or want her in my life because I never tell her anything, and asked if I was going to even have her in my wedding. I'm also engaged. She was livid when I told her no, because I was planning on eloping to a different country, but that she was welcome to buy a plane ticket if she wanted to come. Then I walked out. I texted her saying to completely remove me from her wedding, that she clearly does not want me in it if she's so quick to tell me that I'm out every other day. If she wants to blame someone for ruining her wedding day, she should have to find someone else, because I'm not going to let it be me. Not the jerk. Based on what you've said, she is, at a minimum, being a bridezilla jerk. But just a thought experiment. Let's assume for a moment that you are actually exaggerating. Your sister's not really a narcissist. The reality is that you two just don't get along very well, and she's having a stressful time planning the wedding. It's stressful at the best of times, I know from experience. Even in that case, you're still not the jerk. You have no obligation to be your sister's maid of honor, or to attend her wedding, or to have any relationship with her at all. Your sister is entitled to her feelings of being hurt, but you are entitled to control the level of contact and involvement you want with her. Not the jerk. I think this is beyond wedding stress. OP info. Is this brand new behavior, or has your sister always taken out her frustrations on you or somebody else in the family? Very rarely can you get somebody to have an epiphany and see your side of a story. And I'm only making an assumption based on the information here that whenever your sister is frustrated, stressed, or perceives that something's wrong, she totally attacks you and goes off instead of maturely addressing whatever the true issue is. If this is the case, you have to separate behavior from the person and decide what you can and cannot tolerate. I think it's wonderful that you walked away, and I'm not sure how that impacts your relationship with your parents or others in the family, and you need to be prepared for backlash from them. Your sister is most likely going to tell them some convoluted version of what actually happened. Am I the jerk for telling my daughter it's okay to use her mother for money? So I used to be married to Judy, 36 female, and we have a daughter, Scarlett, who's 13 together. Fake names. Judy never wanted kids, but I did, and I assumed she did too. We had her, and Judy completely changed. She wasn't caring towards Scarlett. They didn't bond, and she blamed Scarlett for us losing our independence. About a year after, we had a divorce, and she gave me everything. It did hurt me that she didn't even want to see Scarlett once a year even. She moved to Seattle months later, started running a business, got really fit. Her cousin told me she even got laser surgery to remove the stretch marks. Since then, Judy has moved to LA and divides her time between there, London, Mumbai, and New York City. She has become a fairly famous influencer and socialite. I check her Instagram every now and then, and she's been at parties with celebrities all over the world and truly seems happy. To her credit, every time her financial situation changed, she would come back and get our child support agreement changed to give more to Scarlett. Every time she'd come, she would spend time with Scarlett. She even kept it at the same, even though my new wife makes a lot more money than both of us, and we don't need it now. About 3 years ago, she started calling more to talk to Scarlett. She would also come over more, and every spring break, she comes for those 2 weeks. She phones every night unless she's in London, Mumbai, or New York City, in which case she just sends a text. On New Year's, she was at some celebrity's party, but still took the time to phone. Now, I'm not saying this makes up for anything, but she has been a presence in Scarlett's life. Well, we just found out that Judy's grandfather is very ill and he's going to pass within a month, maybe early March at best. So she's going to India for spring break for his funeral and has requested to take Scarlett with her. I'm fine with that. My wife is fine with that. However, Scarlett got really upset at the idea of spending 2 weeks in India. I pointed out her mom will take her to all the nice places. She'll get to see great things, meet that part of her family. But she said that it's not fair. So I pointed out that at the very least, she can get whatever she wants out of her mom in those 2 weeks. My wife overheard and said I was being a jerk for telling Scarlett that it's all right for her to use her mom for cash since she's barely been in her life. I pointed out I didn't say that, but we argued, and since then, I realized what I said kind of did amount to that. Was I the jerk? Edit. Judy never told me she didn't want to have kids. She allowed me to believe that she did. If I knew she didn't, we wouldn't have gotten married. You're the jerk. If Scarlett doesn't want to go, don't make her go. Advocating for taking advantage of her mother is crappy. You managed to land not 1, but 2 decent women. I cannot for the life of me understand how. Reddit. The perfect place to go to find people who will rip a man to shreds in the morning because he was broken by the fact that his daughter didn't want him to walk her down the aisle, and then refer to a woman who abandoned her kid as a decent woman. She abandoned her, but has always been paying and using her pay in accordance of her income. More than most deadbeat dads. Edit. I grew up with a deadbeat dad. No financial help from my mom or real involvement in my life. So I worded that a bit harsh. So think deadbeat parent. Am I the jerk for waking up my roommate at 7 a.m. and yelling at her? I, 20 female, woke up my roommate, who's also 20 female, let's call her roommate, at 7 a.m. and yelled at her because she left our front door unlocked and cracked open. I posted on this sub before about would I be the jerk for talking to her about leaving the door open to our apartment, unlocked and other issues, and based on what you guys said, I decided to. She seemed pretty receptive to it, but since then, her habit of forgetting it hasn't changed. I have a lot of issues with sleep, and last night I wasn't able to get any, so I went downstairs to grab an energy drink at around 7. The first thing I noticed was that there was a light coming from our front door, and as I came closer, I realized it was unlocked and partially open. The first thing that came to my mind was that there was a break-in, and I panicked and woke up my roommate because I thought we had been robbed or something. I told her that our door wasn't closed all the way and was freaking out pretty badly. Then she said, "Oh, that's most likely my fault. I got delivery pretty late and probably forgot to close the door." The way she was so nonchalant really upset me, and I was already exhausted, so I rounded on her and yelled, "What's wrong with you? I thought I asked you to be more careful about this. We've been living in this flat for 5 months now, and you still can't remember to shut the door properly? Are you a kid? Should I tape a sign to the door that reminds you how to close it?" I didn't let her say anything after my rant and just went to my bedroom, but I felt bad about it later. I did apologize to her already, and we went grocery shopping together, and everything seems okay between us, but I still feel like a jerk. So, am I the jerk? Edit. I can't change the title. Sorry, it's kind of misleading. I'd get a door alarm, but I'm not even allowed to install my own curtains in this apartment, so I'm a bit done over in that regard. I grabbed an energy drink because I had a 9 a.m. class that I didn't end up going to because I was so upset. And on top of the basic security concerns, someone got attacked in the apartment complex like a block away from ours, so I've been more paranoid than usual. Edit 2. When our lease ends, I'm moving in with a different friend, so hopefully we don't have any more major incidents until then. Edit 3. My roommate has diagnosed ADD, but doesn't take her meds for it, and I'm not in a position to nag her about it. Not the jerk. I couldn't live with someone who is so nonchalant about leaving your door not just unlocked, but partially open. If it's just unlocked, anyone walking past would have to try to open the knob to realize that it's not locked, but any random walking past could notice if the door isn't even closed. She's lucky all that happened is she got screamed at. You're both lucky.
Support our channel by joining as a member today, and we'll give you a shout out in our next video.
Or come watch this video next. You won't believe what Karen does in that one.